The road to rights. The road to women's rights was long and hard. Today, women and men have equal rights, but it wasn't always this way. The women's suffrage movement lasted about an entire century. It began in the 1820s and concluded August 26, 1920, with the 19th Amendment. Before the women's suffrage, women were not allowed the right to vote, own property, sue, be sued, make contracts, divorce, get a higher education, or collect their own wages. In order to be considered a true woman, women had to keep the house, bear and raise the children without the option of birth control, were obligated to marry, and be obedient to every whim of their husband. I am personally very grateful to those many men and women who struggled, protested, and were even beaten or imprisoned fighting for the rights I have today. The American women's suffrage movement began with Lucretia Mott and Elizabeth Cady Stanton while at the World Anti-Slavery Convention in London, where Mott and Stanton became friends. Before the convention started, however, despite Lucretia's status as one of 6 women delegates, the men at the convention voted the women be excluded. The women also had to sit in a segregated area. There were some men who opposed the excluding of the women. Their names were William Lloyd Garrison and Wendell Phillips. Garrison, Nathaniel P. Rogers, William Adams, and African-American activist Charles Lennox Remond even sat with the women. The exclusion only provoked Mott and Stanton to organize a women's rights convention, and in 1848 they did. The Seneca Falls Convention, held in New York by Lucretia and Elizabeth, was the first ever public women's rights meeting in the United States. There were 300 attendees at the Seneca Falls Convention. However, only 100 signed the Declaration of Sentiments created by Elizabeth Cady Stanton. 32 men and 68 women supported the idea, which is to say that men were supportive too, but some wives could not participate in the demand for women's rights because of their husbands or children. The 1848 Declaration of Sentiments, based on the famous Declaration of Independence, according to the North Star, a book by Frederick Douglass, the document was the grand movement for attaining the civil, social, political, and religious rights of women. The year after the convention, accruing for the demand of women's rights, the first state constitution in California extends property rights to women, but not fully. In 1850, however, in Worcester, Massachusetts, there was the first ever National Women's Rights Convention. Frederick Douglass, Paulina Wright Davis, Abby Kelly Foster, William Lloyd Garrison, Lucy Stone were all in attendance. There formed a strong alliance between the suffragettes and the abolitionists. In 1851, the Second National Women's Rights Convention was held, again in Worcester, Massachusetts. The women's rights idea had taken flight and attracted more and more people, and this time, horsemen, New York Tribune columnist Elizabeth Oakes Smith, and Reverend Harry Ward Beecher, who was one of the nation's most popular preachers, all attended. At a women's rights convention in Akron, Ohio, Sojourner Truth, former slave and attendee of the first Worcester, Massachusetts convention, delivered her now famous speech, Ain't I a Woman?, which I will show you now. Well, children, where there is so much racket, there must be something out of kilter. I think that twixt the Negroes of the South and the women of the North all talking about rights, the white men will be in a fix pretty soon. But what's all this here talking about? That man over there says that woman needs to be helped into carriages and lifted over ditches and to have the best place everywhere. Nobody ever helps me into carriages or over mud puddles or gives me any best place. And ain't I a woman? Look at me. Look at my arms. I have plowed and planted and gathered into barns, and no man could head me. And ain't I a woman? I could work as much and eat as much as man when I could get it, and bear the lash as well. And ain't I a woman? I have borne 13 children, and seen almost all sold off to slavery, and when I cried out with my mother's grief, none but Jesus heard me. And ain't I a woman? Then they talk about this thing in the head. What's this they call it? Intellect. That's it, honey. What's that got to do with women's rights or Negroes' rights? If my cup won't hold but a pint, and yours holds a quart, wouldn't you be mean not to let me have my little half measure full? Then that little man in black there says that women can't have as much rights as men, 'cause Christ wasn't a woman. Where did your Christ come from? Where did your Christ come from? From God and a woman. Man had nothing to do with him. If the first woman God ever made was strong enough to turn the world upside down and all alone, these women together ought to be able to turn it right back and get it the right side up again. And now they's asking to do it. The men better let them. Obliged to you for hearing me, and now old Sojourner ain't got nothing more to say. Women's clothing of the Jackson era was often made up of tight restrictive corsets and long sweeping skirts or dresses that were unsanitary and could often weigh over 3 pounds. Women of the Jackson era also had to wear corsets that badly deformed their bodies in order to be considered beautiful. Women's sweeping skirts often collected bacteria and disease and made their wearers ill. Men liked to think of women as delicate and fragile, so if women had a hearty appetite or good hygiene, it would be looked down on. There were many people who objected corsets. Physicians objected for health reasons. Corsets would badly deform the rib cage and the torso. Religious leaders didn't like the display of the exaggerated feminine shape, and feminists described corsets as real and symbolic imprisonment of women. There were many men who were opposed to women having rights, but even some women were too. I found some primary sources straight from Mr. Samuel Evans and men from the debate on the cancellation bill about reasons why women shouldn't be allowed to vote. Here they are. Because all government rests ultimately on force, to which women, owing to physical, moral, and social reasons, are not capable of contributing. Because women would be corrupted by politics and chivalry would die out. If women became involved in politics, they would stop marrying, having children, and the human race would die out. These things may seem a little absurd, but it was very important to them at the time. I feel it is important to talk about the other opinion. I, however, am very happy that women did get the vote because it shapes my entire future. Birth control. Birth control was very important because it let women have sexual intercourse without having to bear more children. Before birth control, the only way found to not have children was abstinence. Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Susan B. Anthony wanted abstinence to make the world pure and clean. Birth control was not invented until after the women's suffrage. Along with the abstinence, the only other ways to avoid having children that were discovered were usually or unsafe. August 18th, 1920. The 19th Amendment finally guarantees women all over America, after years and years of fighting, the right to vote. Even though today we finally have equal rights, women today are still being objectified from opinion and personal choice. Though this is still a problem, it is one we can overcome, just like the suffragettes before us. Every year on History Day, as you are hearing this, I realize different stories just like this one are being told all over America about our past.